Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Beasts Factual and Fantastic by Elizabeth Morrison. This is book one in the Medieval Imagination series, which I have read other books in, and throughout this series I have been impressed by the blend of art, literature, and scholarship, which kind of comes together to shed light on medieval thought and life and, as in the title, imagination. So I really enjoyed this series and I decided to get another one from this series because I have been impressed with everything else, and I have to say I was impressed with this one as well. I'm going to be talking about what you can expect if you get this book, some interesting things that I learned or thought about or had comments on when reading this book, an overall view of the book, and who I think would enjoy getting this book. So as you can tell, it's quite a bit shorter, but don't let that dissuade you. It's just over 100 pages, and it's quite an ambitious subject to cover in 100 pages. You're giving yourself, essentially, if you divide perfectly the 3 sections that the author wants to cover, 30 pages. And beasts, I mean, that is a broad subject. We're talking about fantastical beasts, factual beasts, those are the two underneath, and the author also is covering symbolic beasts, and again, in 100 pages gives you an average of 30 pages per subject. So those are the 3 sections, and we can see from the content that they are covering animals in daily life, so that would be the factual side, animals and how they were used in actual day-to-day life in medieval times. Symbolic creatures, so this is where you get into things like heraldry, astrology, and saints and Christianity. So that's that middle section, which kind of bridges the daily life to this third section, which is fantastic beasts. So these are the hybrids, the mythology, and then going into things like dragons and demons and how they fit in. Each of these 3 sections, as you can see, has subsections which go into more detail. For example, animals in daily life breaks down further into creating the animals, work and play, warfare, animals in the law, and studying animals. And at the end of each of these sections, there's another section called Beasts in Focus, where a particular work is taken, or a particular, in the case of 98 on Fantastic Beasts, it's the Apocalypse, so it's the book of Revelations, but a particular text is chosen and the beasts in it are given particular focus. So in daily life, that is the hunting manual, so a hunting manual that's designed, and this is where the art is combined with quotes from the text. In symbolic, it is the bestiary, so quotes from the bestiary along with art. And then in third, it is, as mentioned, the Apocalypse, so the book of Revelations, and beasts and art from that. So that is the general outline the author is following, and as you can imagine, this is quite a high level overview. We're not going to get deep into anything, and the book is a combination of text and art, but very heavy on the art. So the art is what features heavily throughout, and we also have these full pages to really zoom in on parts of the art. Nothing annoys me more. Well, things annoy me more than this, but it's frustrating to get a piece of a book that focuses on art and the prints are so small you have to have the book up here to see any of the detail, when I know you have the ability to zoom in and showcase the pieces of art. So there is plenty of text. There is also little labels on all these pieces of art explaining where it comes from and the approximate dates, and also text, so quoted text. It is really a blend of literature, scholarship, and art, but the art really features heavily. We have some decapitations here, as you do. And that's what really makes this book really fantastic to look through. I really like these astrological ones that I'm showing you right now. And even though it's 100 pages, and I would say the text is quite light because we're approaching everything at a high level, it still takes quite a bit to work through this book because you're going to have to spend quite a bit of time looking at this art to do it right. The art takes and demands quite a bit of time, so don't think that because it's 100 pages, this is a 30-minute read that you can just blow through. I think taking the appropriate amount of time to look at all of the art is what really makes this book stand out. So, trying to show off all these pieces. This is one of my favorites, this little guy right here. So now I wanted to go into some of the interesting bits that I read or came across that I had thoughts while reading, and I will tell you the page number that this came from because I felt like that is relevant if you have this book at home. The first is on page 24. The art isn't really relevant, but I'll hold it up. And that is animals and the law. And the section starts out by saying that we can tell what's valued or how it's valued, how something is valued in society by the laws that surround it, if there's a written judicial code. And I had never thought about that before, but it makes sense. If something has high value or is highly contested, it makes sense that there's going to grow up a legal tradition around that. So by using that, the author is going into the role animals played in day-to-day life, which also makes sense. I mean, animals were your link between life and death in a lot of cases. It's also used in things like warfare. So it had a very prominent place in the day-to-day life of a medieval person. And so it would make sense that there would be laws growing up around it. But that was just a connection that I hadn't thought of before and was called to my attention in this book. Page 49 got me interested, and this is where we start going into astrological animals, just because I have another book on my shelf right now, which is Astrology in Medieval Texts. So I'm really excited to read that, especially having read this and seeing how interested it is. So because of the nature of this book, the astrological animals really only get a couple pages, but the art is fantastic. So I'm excited to read the other book I have that's probably going to be a lot more in-depth. Even though it's also a smaller book, it can focus just on this section. It's something I haven't really learned much about, but in medieval times, astronomy and astrology were very closely linked under the same science and discipline. So it's something that is important to the medieval life, and I am intrigued to learn more about. On page 64, we start the bestiary section, and this part was very, very interesting to me because I recently came off a very detailed and academic book on a medieval bestiary where the author had taken one book, and if I do my research, that will be linked somewhere, maybe at the end of the video. The author took one book and just focused on that book and wrote a whole book on one particular bestiary and talked about the tradition of it and how we can read the text in it and how the authors put it together and how it was used and who was using it. So when I read this section, this bestiary section, it was a high-level overview of everything that I had read, and that other book, that medieval bestiary book that I read, kind of filled in some of the blanks and let me better appreciate what I was reading in this book. And that's where I feel like this book, well, Fantastic is obviously high level, and having read other things, you can fill in the blank. But unlike the other book I read, which was mostly text, this has a lot of fantastic art, which I also enjoyed looking at. So I felt like they did kind of complement each other. And it was a cool connection as I read these quotes. And I recognized many of these quotes because of the other text that I had read. Finally, on page 102, which is actually the suggestions for further reading, you know you're into a topic way too deep when you go to the suggested reading to see what else you could read on this topic, and you've already read some of these books. So I've already read this one by Alex Bovey, Monsters and Grotesques in Medieval Manuscripts, so you know you're in too deep when you see books you've already read on the suggested reading. But they do have this if you want to check out anything else in this field. So obviously this is a high level, but the art takes time. I've already touched on that. So don't think that you can just sit down and blow through it. The text is light, the art is heavy, as in it's light on the text, but heavier on the art. So take time to go through and really appreciate all the fantastic printings that have been done on the art. As you may have noticed from me talking about this, I've read a number of other books in this subject or on this field, so I felt like I could fill in a lot of the blanks in this book, but I don't think you necessarily have to have read that, and I'll get into who this book could be for, because there's kind of two different groups. But overall, this was a very, very interesting book that gave a high-level overview of the three different categories of beasts in medieval life, and it was as impressive as any of the other books in this medieval imagination series. So I have been enjoying this series, and I will continue to recommend it, and I don't know how many books are in this series, but if there's more, I will be getting those. Who should read this? So I think there's kind of two different groups, and they're not really exclusionary. So I think if you enjoy or have any interest in this topic, you will like this book. But I can kind of think of two different avenues to take to get to this book. And the first is if you've already read more detailed books on this subject like I have. I'm not a scholar or a historian or study this in any formal way, but I've just read a number of books up to this point, which kind of allowed me to fill in some of the blanks of this book while also just appreciating the art. And in looking at the art in this book, I can make other connections that the author of this book didn't have time to make because of the other reading that I have done. So this is one that kind of slots in nicely if you've already done a lot of reading and you just want a book to add to your collection that has fantastic art. On the other hand, if you are just starting out, This is also a fantastic book because it's high level. It gives you an overview of a wide variety of topics and gives you all the interesting art to look at in the meanwhile. Then from reading this book, you can decide if you want to read further, and you have specific avenues to pursue if you want to read further. So I think there's those two avenues to approach this, which could be helpful. Third could be a younger reader. So if you have someone who is late elementary school and is kind of looking to go to the next level, maybe they've exhausted everything from the medieval section of the kids part of the library, this could be a great book because nothing in here is too heavy or dark or inappropriate for a young child to read, and there's a lot of fantastic art. I mean, the full color illustrations are just going to pull in kids who are still interested in having that colorful, highly visual appeal, which adults like that too. I like a good book with art. That was one of my main complaints about that bestiary book, was the lack of art. So I think you can still pull in the interest of young kids while introducing them to concepts and also just more books that they might not have in the kids section of the library. So I think a book like this has wide appeal, and there's a number of avenues to reach this book, and it was overall a really good book to read. I do recommend it, and another win for the Medieval Imagination series, which I have been continually impressed with. If you have read this book and have thoughts on it, or if you want to recommend other books for me to read, please leave those in the comment section down below. I love to receive them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.